The Gauntlet Ascend was about as inviting as a tax audit on a rainy Monday morning, grim, metallic, and filled with the kind of people who'd stab you for a stale donut. But up here in the orbital hub, where the so-called elite rubbed shoulders with grease-stained engineers, it was home. And no one loved this hellhole more than Vex Rigel. "Vex, you lazy bastard, are you gonna fix that or just stare at it till it bursts into flames?" grumbled a voice from behind, breaking the symphony of clattering tools and half-hearted curses. "It's called diagnostics, Jax," Vex replied, giving the tangled mess of wires a disdainful look. "But sure, let's just jab a wrench in there and see if it sings, huh?" he smirked, brushing a hand through his permanently disheveled hair, streaked with grease and regret. Jax, a fellow engineer with the temperament of a bear woken from hibernation, grunted and leaned against the wall, his overall covered in more patches than fabric. "Diagnostics, my ass. You're just waiting for the AI to talk dirty to you again." "Maybe," Vex grinned, "but at least the AI got more personality than your ex." He flicked a switch, and the control panel lit up, sputtering out data like a drunk spilling secrets. "Systems nominal," the AI annoyingly cheerful voice chimed, "except for minor fluctuations in the space-time continuum." "No biggie." Jax raised an eyebrow which on his craggy face looked like a seismic event. "Space-time, what now?" Vex waved a dismissive hand. "Probably just the AI being melodramatic again. You know how it loves to pretend we're all in mortal peril." It was then that the elevator shuddered, a gut-wrenching lurch that even made the AI pause. "Correction, potential incursion detected." "See," Vex said, trying to sound confident. "Just a potential incursion, like potentially getting hit by a meteor. No need to panic." Jax wasn't buying it. "Damn time-traveling aliens again. Thought they got bored last time they visited." "Yeah, well," Vex shrugged, fiddling with his toolkit, "guess they decided to make us their favorite sitcom." The AI chimed again, this time with an edge of urgency that could cut glass. "Intruder alert. Unauthorized personnel in restricted zones." "Great," Vex muttered, grabbing his tool belt. Time for the welcoming committee. As they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of Gauntlet Ascend, the place seemed to take on a life of its own, pipes hissing like disgruntled cats, lights flickering with the enthusiasm of a failing heart monitor. "You think these aliens get some kind of kick out of this?" Jax asked, his hand never straying far from the wrench tucked into his belt like an improvised weapon. Vex smirked. "Everyone's gotta have a hobby. Some people collect stamps, others harass the fabric of reality." Their boots clanged against the metal flooring, echoing through the corridors like a ghostly drumbeat, but there was nothing spectral about what they found in the restricted zone. A group of figures, clad in technology that seemed to laugh in the face of physics, were busy doing something to the main server interface. "I don't suppose you're here for the scenic views," Vex called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. One of the figures turned, its face covered by a mask that made it look like a discontented insect. "This does not concern you, human," it buzzed, the voice synthetic yet undeniably condescending. "Oh, but it does," Vex said, tapping the side of his head. "I'm the one who has to clean up the mess when you lot bugger off." Jax, never one for diplomatic subtleties, stepped forward. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why you're here before I start swinging this wrench." The alien seemed to consider this, its head tilted at an angle that suggested either curiosity or contempt, or both. "Temporal recalibration," it finally said, as if that explained everything. "Ah, that clears it up," Vex quipped. "You're fixing the clock." Ignoring them, the alien turned back to the server, its hands moving with a speed that suggested impatience. Vex leaned closer to Jax. "Think we should do something?" Jax cracked his knuckles. "Well, I didn't come here for the ambience." The ensuing brawl, if it could be called that, was less about style and more about desperation. Vex ducked and dodged, aiming for wires and circuits, trying to disrupt whatever the aliens were doing. Jax, true to form, swung his wrench like a man trying to keep his last bar of soap in the shower. "They're tougher than they look," Jax shouted, narrowly avoiding a swipe from one of the aliens, its limbs unfurling with unsettling precision. "Yeah, and uglier too," Vex replied, jabbing his boot into a mess of cables. Guess they didn't get the memo about personal space. The fight was brief and brutal, with Vex and Jax eventually standing over the crumpled forms of the intruders, breathing hard and nursing a collection of new bruises. "Well, that was fun," Vex said, rubbing a sore shoulder. "Guess we should call someone to clean this up." "You mean someone else," Jax corrected, nudging an unconscious alien with his boot. "Exactly," Vex grinned. "Someone else." The AI chose that moment to chime in again. "Alert, further incursions detected, multiple locations." "Because of course," Vex sighed, slumping against the wall. "Think we can just ignore them and pretend it's all a bad dream?" Jax chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Not unless you want an alarm clock that bites." He pushed away from the wall, looking down the corridor. "Come on, let's go save the bloody day." Vex nodded, reluctantly pushing off as well. "Hey, if I die, you can have my wrench collection." "Gee, thanks," Jax replied, rolling his eyes. "Tell you what, if I die, you can stop pretending to like me." "Deal," Vex laughed, though the sound was more weary than amused. They moved on, two specks of defiance against the grand indifference of space, ready to face whatever time-twisting nonsense awaited them next. The corridor stretched long and empty, the occasional whir of machinery the only sound, like an orchestra pit filled with snoring musicians. Vex couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though that was probably just paranoia mixed with the unsettling knowledge of aliens who viewed reality as a suggestion. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Nova Cade, the station's resident expert on everything that made Vex's head spin: quantum physics, temporal mechanics, and exactly how to perfectly brew space coffee. "Vex," she said, brushing back a lock of hair with one hand, her other clutching a datapad like it was a lifeline. "Jax, got caught up in the alien welcoming committee, I see." "Yeah," Vex replied, eyeing the datapad. "We were just giving them the grand tour." Nova snorted. "More like you were introducing them to the fine art of getting your ass handed to you." "Hey," Jax protested, "we held our own." "Sure," Nova said with a smirk. "If by held your own you mean didn't die immediately." Vex gave her a playful shove. "What do you know about these incursions?" She tapped the datapad, and a holographic display flickered to life, showing a mess of data that looked more like a toddler's drawing than anything comprehensible. "They're trying to access the chrono chamber," she said, pointing at a spot on the display that pulsed ominously. "Chrono chamber," Jax echoed, scratching his head. "You mean the big clock?" Nova rolled her eyes. "It's a bit more than that. It's what keeps time running smoothly up here, prevents us from aging backward or ending up in the Jurassic." Vex nodded, not entirely understanding but pretending as if he did, like most things in life. "So what's the plan?" Nova shrugged. "Same as always, we wing it." "I like the sound of that," Jax said, grinning. "When have plans ever worked out for us anyway?" "Never," Vex agreed. "Plans are for people with something to lose." "And what do we have?" Nova asked, arching an eyebrow. "Nothing," Vex replied with a smirk, "except maybe a story to tell if we survive." They set off toward the chrono chamber, the weight of their situation hanging over them like a storm cloud. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the station, where the air was thick with the smell of ozone and the distant hum of power conduits. "You ever think," Jax said as they walked, "that maybe we're all just small cogs in some bigger machine?" "Oh, definitely," Vex replied. "But I'd rather be a small cog with a sense of humor than a big one with nothing to say." Nova glanced at them, her expression caught between amusement and exasperation. "You two are incorrigible." "Thanks," Vex said, grinning. "We try our best." The chrono chamber was not what they'd expected. Instead of some grand, imposing structure, it was a compact, unassuming room filled with panels and glowing displays that seemed to whisper secrets to anyone who cared to listen. "This is it?" Jax asked, looking around with disappointment. "I was expecting something bigger." "That's what she said," Vex quipped, earning a snort from Nova. They approached the main console, Nova's fingers dancing over the controls with the deftness of a concert pianist. "Okay, here's the deal," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "We need to lock this place down, make sure no more unwanted guests drop by." Vex nodded, though his mind was already racing with ideas that usually ended in disaster. "And if they do," Nova glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips, "then we do what we always do, improvise." Jax clapped a hand on Vex's shoulder. "I hope you're ready to dance, my friend." "Always," Vex said, though he wondered if this time their dance might lead them straight into the abyss. But as always, they had no choice but to face it head-on, with humor as their shield and sarcasm their sword. Vex Rigel leaned against the cold metal wall of the chrono chamber, his mind a chaotic mix of urgency, skepticism, and a dash of gallows humor. The air was thick with the promise of impending doom, which in his line of work was about as common as breathing. "All right, Nova," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You said we need to lock this place down. How exactly do we do that without blowing ourselves into the next dimension?" Nova Cade, the quantum guru who could talk circles around anyone except a stubborn engineer like Vex, glanced up from her console, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "Ever try turning it off and on again?" "Ha ha," Vex replied dryly. "You should be on stage. The one that collapses." "Okay, children," Jax interjected, crossing his arms over his chest. "Are we going to fix this mess or stand around throwing shade?" Nova rolled her eyes, tapping a few commands into the console. "Right. So, here's the deal. We need to reroute power through the auxiliary conduits, then initiate a hard reset on the mainframe. That should close any temporal rifts long enough for us to figure out what the hell is going on." "Sounds simple," Jax remarked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure nothing will go wrong." Vex pushed himself off the wall, steeling himself for what was sure to be another round of Vex versus the universe. "All right, Jax, you take the conduits. I'll handle the reset. Nova, you play babysitter." "Because that's exactly what I signed up for," Nova muttered, already typing furiously on her datapad. With their makeshift plan in motion, Vex and Jax trudged into the bowels of the gauntlet ascend, each step echoing with a grim determination. It wasn't long before they reached the junction, a tangled mess of wires and conduits that looked like the aftermath of a drunken spider's web-spinning contest. "Lovely," Jax muttered, eyeing the chaos. "Whoever designed this should be slapped." Vex chuckled, squatting down to get a better look. "Pretty sure they were," repeatedly. With a wrench, as Jax set to work rerouting the power, Vex keyed in a sequence on his handheld terminal, initiating the reset procedures. The station's AI, that ever-cheerful voice in their heads, chimed in with its usual flair for the dramatic. "Warning, system instability detected. Please brace for possible implosion." "Implosion," Jax snorted, yanking a bundle of wires free. "That's just Tuesday." They worked in silence for a while, the weight of their task a silent specter at their shoulders. Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they were akin to two ants trying to hold back an avalanche. But then again, in space, optimism was like bringing a knife to a laser fight, useless but occasionally entertaining. "How's it going over there?" Vex called out, glancing at Jax. Jax grunted, his expression a mix of concentration and annoyance. "Oh, just living the dream, man." Vex smirked, returning his focus to the console. He keyed in the final command, his finger hovering over the execute button. "Ready? Born ready," Jax replied, though his voice was tinged with a hint of trepidation. With a resigned sigh, Vex pressed the button, triggering a low hum that reverberated through the station. For a moment, nothing happened, and Vex dared to hope they'd managed to avert disaster without adding to their ever-growing list of injuries. Then the floor trembled, a soft shudder that quickly built into a violent quake. Lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters in the confined space. "Guess that answers that," Jax muttered, gripping a conduit for support as the station groaned around them. Vex let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Let's get back to Nova before this place decides to fold in on itself. They stumbled down the corridor, the station's instability making every step feel like navigating a funhouse, in the wrong kind of way. When they finally reached the chrono chamber, Nova was still at the console, a picture of calm amidst the chaos. "How's it looking?" Vex asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Like a cat's cradle on fire," Nova replied without missing a beat. "But the good news is I think we're stable, for now." "That's the best news I've heard all day," Jax said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Although that's not saying much." "More good news," Nova added, her tone too cheerful to be genuine. "I'm detecting alien AI proxies engaging with our systems. They've managed to bypass our outer defenses and are currently having a field day with our mainframe." Vex rubbed the bridge of his nose, fighting the urge to find the nearest airlock and scream into the void. "So what you're saying is we're royally screwed. Only if we do nothing," Nova replied, her fingers flying over the console. "I've initiated a countermeasure protocol, but it'll only buy us some time." Vex grimaced, the enormity of their situation settling like a lead weight in his gut. "Looks like we're in for a fight then." "More like a dance," Nova corrected, her eyes fixed on the data streaming across her screen. "And we better hope we don't step on too many toes." Jax rolled his shoulders, the familiar creak of his joints a comforting reminder of their shared mortality. "Guess we better get our dancing shoes on." The gravity of their situation was a stark contrast to the banter, but it was the only weapon they had against the absurdity of their predicament. With the alien AI bearing down, they had no choice but to meet the threat head-on, their only ally's cynical humor and a shared determination to survive. As Vex turned his attention to the task at hand, he couldn't help but reflect on the irony of it all. Here they were, just a ragtag group of engineers and technicians, thrust into the role of unlikely heroes against an enemy that made a mockery of physics and reason. "Hey, Vex," Nova called out, her voice pulling him back to the present. "Think we can hold out?" Vex met her gaze, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. "Well, I've always wanted a front row seat to the end of the world. Guess this is as good a view as any." Nova chuckled, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Yeah, but that's what makes me lovable." As they worked, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they were clinging to the edge of a precipice. The alien AI was relentless, its probes and subroutines a constant barrage against their defenses. But they'd been in tight spots before, and if there was one thing Vex knew, it was that you never counted a scrappy engineer out. Not when there was still a chance, however slim, to pull off a miracle. The skirmishes between the human and alien AI proxies were like watching an old-school video game, the kind with pixelated graphics and obnoxiously cheerful sound effects. Except this wasn't a game, and the stakes were a hell of a lot higher than a high score. As Vex monitored the unfolding battle, he couldn't help but marvel at the alien AI sophistication. It moved with a fluidity and precision that made their own systems look like stone knives and bearskins. "Okay, here's what we're gonna do," Nova announced, breaking the tense silence. "I'm going to deploy a series of counter-hacks, see if we can disrupt their control long enough to get a message out to command. We need reinforcements if we're going to have any chance of holding them off." "Sounds good," Vex replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a losing battle. "Let's get to work." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity, a chaotic dance of keystrokes and commands as they fought to stave off the alien onslaught. Vex's eyes burned from staring at the screen, his muscles aching from tension and exertion. Every so often, Jax would mutter darkly under his breath, his own frustration mirroring Vex's own. "How's it looking, Nova?" Jax asked, pausing to stretch his back. "We're holding," Nova replied, though her voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "But it's only a matter of time before they find another way in." Vex nodded, his mind racing with ideas and half-formed plans. "We just need to hold out a little longer," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "If we can get that message out, maybe." The station shuddered, a deep rumble that reverberated through the walls and set alarms blaring. Vex's heart leapt into his throat, the sudden realization that their situation was even more precarious than he'd thought. "What's happening?" Jax demanded, his eyes wide with alarm. "Proximity alert," Nova said, her fingers flying over the console. "Something's coming." "Great," Vex muttered, his mind racing. Just what we needed. As if in response to his words, the station's AI chimed in, its voice a chipper contrast to the grim reality. "Warning, unidentified vessel approaching. Please prepare for possible impacts." "Impact?" Jax echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "That's one way to put it." Vex's mind raced, the implications of the AI announcement settling over him like a suffocating weight. "We need to get out there," he said, his voice firm despite the rising tide of panic. Now, they moved as one, a trio of determination and desperation, their sole focus on reaching the command center and assessing the threat. The corridors blurred past, a dizzying kaleidoscope of metal and light that seemed to stretch on forever. When they finally burst into the command center, they were met with a scene of chaos. Technicians and officers scrambled to their stations, their voices a cacophony of orders and status reports. Vex pushed his way through the throng, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do we know?" he demanded, his gaze fixed on the main display. "Unidentified vessel, class unknown," one of the officers replied, his voice tight with tension. "It's on a direct course for the station. Time to impact," Nova asked, her eyes glued to the screen. "Minutes," came the grim reply. The implications of their situation hit Vex like a physical blow. They were out of time, out of options, and facing an enemy that defied logic and reason. "All right," Vex said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Let's do this." The next few moments passed in a blur of activity, a frantic race against the clock as they prepared for the approaching vessel. Vex's fingers flew over the console, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and contingency plans. "Here it comes," Nova said, her voice barely audible over the din. The station shuddered, a violent tremor that sent equipment and personnel tumbling to the floor. Vex braced himself against the console, his heart pounding in his chest as the vessel made contact. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the world narrowing to the singular reality of their impending destruction. But then, against all odds, the station held. The vessel bounced off the hull, its trajectory altered by the force of the impact. For a moment there was silence, a stunned, disbelieving pause that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly the chaos resumed, a frantic scramble to assess the damage and regroup. "Well, that was fun," Jax muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Vex couldn't help but chuckle, the sound a release of tension and fear. "Yeah," he replied, his voice weary but resolute. "Let's never do that again." Nova nodded, her expression a mix of relief and determination. "Agreed. But for now, let's focus on surviving." As they turned their attention back to the task at hand, Vex couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of their situation. They were just a ragtag group of engineers and technicians, facing an enemy that defied logic and reason. But in that moment, as they stood together against the odds, Vex couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. After all, they'd faced impossible odds before and come out on top. Who was to say they couldn't do it again? With that thought in mind, Vex turned back to his console, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. They might be outgunned and outmatched, but they weren't out of the fight yet. And as long as they had breath in their lungs and a defiant streak a mile wide, they would keep fighting. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human. To stand against the darkness with nothing but a stubborn will and a sense of humor. To face the impossible and say, "Not today." The gauntlet ascend was doing its best impression of a cheese grater, and Vex Rigel was in the middle of it, trying not to get shredded. When the space elevator decided to start collapsing like a bad soufflé, she was just lucky enough to be in the section rapidly plummeting towards Earth. If she'd been any luckier, she would have been born into a universe where gravity didn't have such a hateful agenda. Looks like we're going down faster than an intern's career prospects after accidentally hitting reply all, Vex said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she clung to the console. Jax, somehow maintaining his equilibrium despite the chaos, snorted. Well, at least there's no shortage of excitement in this job. I was starting to worry about getting bored. The space elevator had been their lifeline, a steel umbilical cord connecting the gauntlet ascend to Earth. Of course, now it was more like a noose tightening around their necks. Despite the overwhelming urge to curl into a ball and pray for soft landing, Vex knew they had to do something. "Okay, listen up," she shouted over the discordant orchestra of alarms. "We need to stabilize this section or we'll be the latest addition to Earth's geological history. Nova, ever the calm in the storm, or perhaps just resigned to their inevitable demise, was already tapping furiously on her datapad. I'm rerouting power to the stabilizers, but it's like trying to stop a landslide with a teaspoon. Great, just great, Vex muttered under her breath. Why didn't I become a chef like my mother wanted? Jax flashed a crooked grin. Because you hate taking orders and dessert is your mortal enemy, point taken. As sections of the station started tearing away, the outside world transformed into a surreal kaleidoscope of blazing stars and blurring Earth. It was the kind of view that would make a poet weep, if you were into that sort of thing. Vex wasn't. "Hey, look on the bright side," Jax said, his voice steady. "If we don't make it, at least we won't have to worry about what's for lunch tomorrow. Speak for yourself," Vex shot back. "I was looking forward to those mystery protein packs." Nova's voice dragged them back to reality. "We've got another problem. Our systems show the alien AI is using time travel to predict and counter our every move." Vex blinked, her brain doing a double take. "Time travel, that's cheating," Jax shrugged. "Can you blame them? If I had that kind of tech, I'd do the same. Problem is, we're playing poker with a telepath," Vex grumbled. "They know our hand before we do." But then the wheels in her head started turning. If the aliens were banking on linear logic, maybe it was time to deal them something they wouldn't see coming: paradoxes. Who knew science fiction logic might save them yet? "Nova," Vex said, a spark of a plan forming. "What if we use paradoxes to mess with their time prediction?" Nova looked up, her eyes gleaming with something akin to admiration, or perhaps it was just the thrill of potential disaster. "That might just work. Paradoxes could disrupt their timeline models." "I love it when you talk nerdy," Jax quipped. "All right, let's make this happen," Vex declared. "We're going to hit them with a paradoxical punch they'll never see coming." The whole plan was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane, but desperate times, desperate measures, and all that jazz. "What's the worst that could happen?" Jax asked, not really expecting an answer. "Well, apart from tearing a hole in the fabric of reality, not much," Vex replied, her grin more than a little manic. As they worked, the station continued its downward spiral, each tremor a reminder of their impending doom. Vex's fingers danced across the console, her mind racing with possibilities. They needed to concoct a paradox that would throw the alien AI off its game, something so contradictory it would fry their circuits. "Okay, we need something that doesn't follow the laws of cause and effect," Nova said, glancing up from her datapad. "Something that can create a feedback loop in their prediction algorithms." Jax scratched his chin. "How about this? We send a message that we've already won the battle, thus forcing them to react to a victory that hasn't happened yet." Vex considered this. "You mean, tell them we've won and they've lost, forcing them to adjust their strategy to a reality that doesn't exist?" "Exactly," Nova chimed in. "If they react to a false outcome, it could create enough confusion in their timeline." It was a gamble, a long shot that would make Russian roulette look like a reasonable sport. But if it meant even a sliver of a chance to tip the scales in their favor, it was worth the risk. "All right," Vex said, a steely resolve settling over her like a second skin. "Let's throw them a curveball they'll never expect." With no time to lose, Nova began drafting a message. a carefully constructed lie that would sow the seeds of chaos in the alien AI predictive model. Meanwhile, Vex and Jax worked to stabilize their section of the elevator, trying to buy themselves enough time to see the plan through. As they worked, Vex found herself thinking of her family, a rare moment of sentimentality in the face of certain death. If she didn't make it, at least she'd gone down fighting, refusing to go quietly into the void. "Here goes nothing," Nova said, her finger hovering over the datapad send button. "Do it," Vex urged, her heart pounding in her chest. Nova pressed the button and the message was away, a digital Trojan horse armed with the power of paradox. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity as they waited for any sign that their gamble had paid off. "Come on, you bastards," Jax muttered, his eyes glued to the console. "Take the bait." As if in answer to his prayer, the console beeped, displaying a sudden shift in the alien AI activity. Their predictive model had indeed faltered, its previously flawless calculations thrown into disarray. "They are stumbling," Nova reported, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. It worked. Vex let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a wave of relief washing over her. "I'll be damned. We might just have a fighting chance." The station continued its descent, but now it was less a plummet and more a controlled fall. They had bought themselves precious time, and with it, the hope that they could find a way out of this mess. "All right," Vex said, her voice firm. "Let's figure out how to land this thing without turning into a smudge on the landscape." Jax snorted. "Should be a piece of cake, right?" Nova gave him a sidelong look. "For someone who doesn't know how to bake, maybe." Touché. Together, they worked to stabilize their descent, their hands flying over the controls in a desperate effort to keep their section from breaking apart. The alien AI might have been momentarily thrown off balance, but they couldn't afford to underestimate it, not when they were this close to the edge. As they fought for control, Vex couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. Time-traveling aliens, paradoxical warfare, and a space elevator collapsing under their feet. It wasn't exactly the kind of story she'd imagined telling over a pint in some dingy bar, but it sure as hell was one she'd never forget. Jax's voice cut through her reverie. "We're coming in hot, but I think we can slow our descent with the auxiliary thrusters." "Do it," Vex replied, her eyes glued to the display. "I'd rather not become a statistic today." With Nova's help, Jax rerouted power to the thrusters, the vibrations beneath their feet lessening as the station began to level out. It was still a bumpy ride, but at least now it felt less like freefall and more like a turbulent flight. "Looks like we're gonna make it after all," Nova said, her relief evident. Vex allowed herself a small smile. "Remind me to never doubt the power of a good paradox." Jax chuckled. "I'll drink to that." Assuming we survive the landing, as the Earth loomed ever larger in the viewport, Vex could feel the tension in the air, the palpable hope that they might just pull this off. Despite the odds, despite the chaos, they had managed to outsmart an enemy that seemed all but undefeatable. "Brace for impact," Vex called out, her voice steady amidst the turmoil. The ground rushed up to meet them, the final descent a blur of noise and motion. But against all odds they touched down, the station shuddering but holding firm. For a moment there was silence, glorious, blessed silence. Then the console chirped, displaying readouts that showed they had improbably survived. "Well, that was fun," Jax said, his voice wry. "Yeah," Vex replied, her heart still racing. "Let's never do that again." Nova shook her head, a smile playing at her lips. "Agreed. But for now, let's focus on ensuring we stay one step ahead." As they surveyed the damage, Vex couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They had made it through this by the skin of their teeth, but they had proved that humans were nothing if not resourceful. And if they could outthink the alien AI once, there was no reason they couldn't do it again. Because in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that, against all odds, humanity was here to stay. With a defiant spirit and a willingness to risk everything, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, determined to forge their own future. And if the time-traveling aliens didn't like it, well, They just have to learn to deal. The gauntlet ascend continued its rather ungraceful descent, the station creaking and groaning like an old man being forced to jog. Vex Rigel, master of the sarcastic response, was hunched over the console, her fingers flying with the kind of desperation usually reserved for last-minute tax returns. Around her, the chaos had settled into a kind of grim routine, which was to say that it was just as bad as it had been 5 minutes ago, but they'd gotten used to it. Jax leaned against a wall, watching the scene unfold with the kind of detached amusement that managed to be both infuriating and oddly reassuring. "You know," he said, his tone conversational, "I always thought the end of the world would have more screaming." Vex didn't even look up. "Give it time," she muttered. "We're still in the prelude." Nova Cade, the team's resident quantum guru and the closest thing they had to a proper nerd, was at her own station, rerouting power like she was rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. "I'd scream, but I'm saving my voice for when things really go to hell." "Smart," Jax nodded. "Don't want to blow out your vocal cords too early." For all their banter, things were grim. The alien AI, with its annoying edge in time travel, had started anticipating their moves with unnerving accuracy, like a chess grandmaster facing off against a child who just learned the rules. "Okay," Vex said, straightening up. "We've got our paradox plan, but we need more than that." "Nova, how's the rerouting coming?" Nova sighed, rubbing her temples, like trying to perform brain surgery through a keyhole. "But I'm making progress. We'll have enough power to the stabilizers soon." "Maybe. Maybe is my favorite kind of optimism," Jax offered. "The only kind I have left," Nova replied. Outside the viewport, the Earth loomed closer, an uncomfortably large reminder that gravity was a harsh mistress. The station's descent was less a graceful arc and more a terrifying plummet, and the alien AI wasn't making it easy by throwing tactical wrenches into their plans. "We need to come up with something new," Vex said, frustration evident in her voice. "They're predicting our every move." Jax pushed off the wall, joining her at the console. "Well, we could always try not doing anything and see if that confuses them," Vex snorted. "You think chaos theory is going to save us?" "Hey, at this point, I'd settle for a minor miracle," Jax replied. But Vex's mind was already working furiously, trying to come up with a strategy that the AI wouldn't see coming. "We need to think like them," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "If they are anticipating us, what's something they wouldn't expect us giving up?" Nova suggested, not entirely joking. "We're not there yet," Vex said. "But maybe we can fake it." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we pretend to surrender, more like feigning incompetence," Vex clarified. "We let them think we're making all the wrong moves, and then, when they least expect it, we hit them with something they didn't see coming." Nova looked skeptical. "Isn't that what we've been doing? Making all the wrong moves?" "Not deliberately," Vex said with a smirk. "This time we'll mean to screw up." It was a ludicrous plan, more hope than strategy, but it was all they had. The alien AI had them by the proverbial throat, and if they didn't do something drastic, they'd end up as just another cosmic footnote. "Let's do it," Nova agreed, more out of lack of options than confidence. With that, Vex set about crafting their tactical incompetence. She redirected some of their dwindling resources in ways that appeared nonsensical at first glance, powering up systems they didn't need, shutting down ones that were critical. The hope was to create enough confusion to slip through the AI defenses. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you've gone off your rocker," Jax observed as he watched her work. "I'm not even sure I was ever on it," Vex replied. Despite the absurdity of their plan, there was something exhilarating about it. Here they were, hurling themselves headfirst into the jaws of almost certain doom, armed with little more than a bluff and a prayer. It was the kind of insanity that required a special kind of bravery or a complete lack of common sense. The station shuddered again, a reminder that their time was rapidly running out. Vex's gaze flicked to the viewport where the Earth continued its inexorable approach. "We've got to make this count," she said, her voice steely. "No pressure," Nova replied dryly. Jax flashed a grin. "I've always thrived under pressure." Also panic. As they continued to implement their plan, the alien AI seemed to take the bait. The predictive models, so flawless moments ago, began to show signs of strain. It was as though the AI couldn't quite comprehend what the humans were doing, and in that hesitation they saw an opening. "We've got them on the ropes," Nova reported, a note of disbelief in her voice. "Then let's finish this," Vex said, a fierce determination in her eyes. With a series of rapid commands, they unleashed their paradoxical salvo. This time, instead of a straightforward message, they embedded a series of contradictions, false victories, unachievable defeats, scenarios that made no logical sense. It was a digital minefield designed to overload the alien AI circuits. The console beeped, displaying a cascade of errors in the AI systems. It was working. "They're stumbling again," Nova confirmed. Vex allowed herself a small smile. They might be down, but they weren't out. Not yet. But as they pressed their advantage, the station's systems continued to degrade. The alien AI might have been distracted, but the reality of their situation hadn't changed. The Gauntlet Ascend was still in freefall, and their resources were running thin. "We need more power to the thrusters," Vex said, urgency creeping into her voice. "I'm on it," Nova replied, her fingers a blur over the datapad. Jax, ever the optimist, glanced at the dwindling readouts. "Think we'll have enough juice to make it? If we don't, I'll buy you a drink in the afterlife," Vex replied. As they fought to stabilize the station, Vex couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. The universe, vast and uncaring, had thrown them one hell of a curveball, but they were still swinging for the fences, determined to go down fighting. "Any sign of the cavalry?" Jax asked, not really expecting a positive answer. Vex shook her head. "We're on our own, just the way I like it," Jax said, a crooked smile on his face. With one final push, they managed to reroute enough power to the auxiliary thrusters, slowing their descent to something that might, with a little luck, resemble a landing instead of an impact. "Here goes everything," Nova said, her voice barely above a whisper. The ground rushed up to meet them, the station shuddering violently as the thrusters fired in a last-ditch effort to arrest their fall. It was a white-knuckle ride, the kind that made amusement park roller coasters look like a gentle stroll, but against all odds they made it. The Gauntlet Ascend touched down with a bone-rattling thud, skidding across the ground before finally coming to a stop. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the groans of the station's beleaguered structure. "Well, that was a blast," Jax said, his voice carrying a hint of awe. Vex let out a shaky laugh. "Let's not do that again anytime soon." Nova nodded, her expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "Agreed. But for now, let's focus on keeping it that way." As they assessed the damage, Vex couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They'd survived, against the odds, against the alien AI, against everything the universe had thrown at them. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was theirs. And in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. "Think the aliens are going to give up?" Jax asked, his tone half joking. Vex shook her head. "Not a chance. But they'll think twice before underestimating us again." "Good," Jax replied. "I like being underestimated." With the immediate danger past, they set about the business of survival. The station might have been battered and bruised, but it was still standing, and so were they. And as long as they had breath in their bodies, they would keep fighting, keep striving, keep proving that humanity was here to stay. Because in the end, that was what it was all about. Not just survival, but defiance. A refusal to be beaten down, to give in, to go quietly into that good night. They were human, damn it, and they weren't going anywhere without a fight. And if the alien AI didn't like it, well, tough luck. The Gauntlet Ascend groaned like a dying beast, a chorus of creaks and metallic whines echoing through the corridors. It was the kind of sound that suggested imminent collapse, never a comforting soundtrack. Vex Rigel stood at the console, her fingers a blur of desperation. "All right, team, this is it. Our last shot before we become a very expensive meteorite." Comforting, Jax replied, leaning against a bulkhead that looked like it was contemplating a career change to pile of rubble. And here I thought today might be boring. Nova Cade, quantum guru and certified genius, was still hunched over her station, rerouting power in a manner that would make a contortionist proud. If anyone wants to start praying, now's the time. But remember, keep it short. We've got work to do. Vex smirked, though it was more habit than humor. Prayer. I thought we were relying on good old human idiocy, not mutually exclusive, Jax added as he pushed off the wall and joined Vex at the console. But I prefer to think of it as human unpredictability. Outside, the Earth was looming larger than ever, an ominous expanse of blue and green that was less home and more impending doom. The alien AI had them in a chokehold, predicting their every move with the ease of a fortune teller on a caffeine high. Every strategy they'd concocted was anticipated and countered before it even left the drawing board. We need something they can't predict, Vex said, her voice tinged with the kind of resolve that usually preceded terrible decisions. Something so ludicrous it defies logic, like us surviving this. Nova quipped without looking up. Exactly like that, Vex replied. We're going to give them chaos on a silver platter. Jax chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. I think we're about to redefine winging it. Vex surveyed the console, her mind a whirlpool of half-baked ideas. We've been thinking like engineers. Time to think like gamblers. We've been playing chess, Nova acknowledged, finally pausing her furious tapping. Maybe it's time for poker, and bluffing's our specialty, Jax said, grinning that infuriatingly cavalier grin of his. What's the play, boss? Vex took a deep breath, the kind that said this might be my last intelligent act. We simulate a systems overload. Make it look like we're shutting down completely. Nova frowned. That's risky. If they call our bluff, we won't have time to recover. True, Vex agreed. But if they think we're out, they might get sloppy. And we only need one opening. Jax nodded, his face suddenly serious. Just one shot. Better make it count. With grim determination, they set about executing the plan. Vex and Nova manipulated the console, sending false signals through the station. Warning lights flickered, alarms blared, and the AI diagnostics would soon be flooded with catastrophic errors. It was a digital illusion, a masterpiece of techno-craftiness designed to fool even the most paranoid of alien intelligences. I'm impressed, Jax said, watching the chaos unfold. We're not actually dying, but it sure looks like it. Thanks, Vex replied, her eyes fixed on the myriad of screens. I've always had a flair for drama. As the deception took hold, the Gauntlet Ascend systems appeared to implode, a symphony of failing components that would have brought tears to the eyes of any half-decent mechanic. The alien AI, for all its computational prowess, seemed to hesitate, its tactical movements faltering in the face of this unexpected turn of events. They're buying it, Nova confirmed, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. At least for now, good. Let's hit them while they're still scratching their heads, Vex said, her fingers dancing over the keys. Jax pulled up a chair, his expression one of grim anticipation. What's the plan for when they catch on? Vex shrugged. Pray for a miracle, or at least a soft landing. Comforting, Jax repeated, though there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. Let's do this. With a final flourish, they launched their counterattack. Instead of calculated moves, they unleashed a barrage of unpredictable tactics, randomized system spikes, oscillating frequencies, and misaligned data streams. It was a cybernetic assault that defied logic, an offense that capitalized on the one thing humanity had always excelled at: chaos. The alien AI, for all its formidable capabilities, wasn't prepared for such an onslaught. Its algorithms, accustomed to discerning patterns and strategies, faltered in the face of sheer randomness. Errors compounded, and its predictive models began to unravel. They're reeling, Nova reported, her voice tinged with excitement. Then let's keep them off balance, Vex replied, her determination unrelenting. As they pressed their advantage, the station continued to shudder violently, the structural integrity a distant memory. Vex knew they were skating on the thinnest of ice, but they'd survived worse, or so she told herself. "I've always loved a good dance," Jax remarked, watching the chaos unfold with a kind of perverse pleasure. "Just don't step on any toes," Nova retorted, her fingers a blur of controlled chaos. For all its audacity, the plan was working. The alien AI, used to dictating the terms of engagement, found itself on the defensive. It was like watching a master pianist suddenly forced to play a broken accordion, surprising, hilarious, and ultimately a bit pitiful. "We're going to pull this off," Vex said, barely containing the hope in her voice. "Don't jinx it," Jax warned, though there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes as well. Outside the viewport, Earth continued its menacing approach, but for the first time it seemed less like a doom clock and more like a challenge, a dare to defy the odds one last time. As the station wobbled on the brink of oblivion, Vex's gaze drifted to her team. They were a ragtag bunch, flawed and irreverent, but they were hers. And together they'd do what humanity did best: survive by the skin of their teeth and maybe flip the bird at the universe while they were at it. "Brace yourselves," Vex commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We're not done yet." The station let out a metallic scream as if protesting their defiance. But Vex didn't care. They were going out swinging, and damned if they weren't going to make it count. "Think the AI will give up?" Jax asked, his tone half serious, half joking. "Not likely," Vex replied. "But they'll think twice about messing with us." As the gauntlet ascend teetered on the precipice, they fought with everything they had, defying logic, reason, and the sneering inevitability of their situation. It was a battle not just against a superior foe, but against the universe itself, a testament to human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. And if the aliens didn't like it, well, they could take it up with the complaints department. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about proving that, even when the chips were down, humanity would always find a way to fight back. With teeth bared and fists clenched, they would carve their place among the stars, one reckless, chaotic gamble at a time. The gauntlet ascend, battered and bruised, was a testament to their tenacity, and as long as they had breath in their bodies, they'd keep fighting. Because that's what it meant to be human, to stand defiantly in the face of extinction and laugh, even if it was through clenched teeth. "So," Jax said, breaking the tense silence. "What's next?" Vex managed a wry smile. "We keep going, until we can't. And then we go a little further." "Sounds like a plan," Nova agreed, her voice a mix of exhaustion and resolve. As they continued their desperate gambit, the gauntlet ascend systems flickered and stuttered, a testament to their tenacity and ingenuity. It was a fragile hope, but it was hope nonetheless. And in the grand scheme of things, that was all they needed. Against the odds, against the universe, against everything that said they should have fallen, they stood resolute. Because they were human and they weren't going anywhere without a fight. The station's descent slowed, the thrusters firing with a last burst of defiance. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step towards one. And in the darkest hour, that was enough. As the Earth loomed above them, a silent witness to their struggle, Vex couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They'd made it this far, and come hell or high water, they'd keep going. Because in their hearts they knew one truth: humanity wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance. And that was a game they intended to win. With a final, resounding crash, the gauntlet ascend came to a halt, battered but unbroken. For a moment there was silence, an almost sacred pause in the chaos of the universe. Then with a grin, Jax broke the stillness. "Well, that was fun," Vex laughed, a sound that was part relief, part incredulity. "Let's not do that again, shall we?" Nova nodded, her eyes gleaming with the light of victory. "Agreed. But for now, let's focus on surviving." As they assessed the damage, Vex knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time they had the advantage. And they'd be damned if they didn't make the most of it. Because in the end, it was always about the fight, the struggle, the relentless defiance of a species that refused to be cowed. And as long as they had that, they had everything they needed. "Think the aliens learned their lesson?" Jax asked, his tone teasing. Vex shook her head, a smirk on her lips. Not a chance. But they'll remember us. With renewed energy, they set about their task, ready to face whatever came next. The universe might have been vast and uncaring, but they were here, and they weren't going anywhere, because that's what it meant to be human, to fight, to survive, to never give up. And if the aliens didn't like it, they could shove it. They had a long road ahead, but for the first time they were ready. Ready to face the unknown, to defy the odds, and to carve their place among the stars. Because that's what they did. They were human, damn it, and they were here to stay. Vex Rigel stood at the console, tapping her foot in a rhythm only discernible to someone whose nerves were frayed beyond repair. The gauntlet Ascend was still teetering on its last leg, and for all the chaos they'd just orchestrated, the alien AI was only momentarily bamboozled. She needed something more disruptive. Luckily, desperate times called for desperate measures, and she had just the kind of crazy idea that might work, if they managed not to blow themselves up first. "You ever heard of a paradox?" Vex asked, her voice barely masking the frenetic energy crackling just below the surface. "Only the ones my exes use to rationalize questionable life choices," Jax replied, leaning lazily against the bulkhead, his grin as irrepressible as it was infuriating. Nova Cade, perched at the datapad with the poise of someone who actually knew what they were doing, nodded. "A real paradox might just confuse the hell out of them, make sense in a suicidal sort of way." "Excellent," Vex said, flashing a grin that could only be described as slightly unhinged. "Let's see if we can give our alien friends a brain freeze." The plan was simple in its complexity and complex in its simplicity. They'd create a feedback loop of contradictory data, something so nonsensical that no algorithm could untangle it. It was the informational equivalent of trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded, underwater, while being shot at. "Vex, you do realize this could backfire spectacularly," Nova interjected, her fingers dancing across the console. "I mean, it might just decide we're not worth the trouble and literally pull the plug on us." Jax shrugged, ever the optimist in a world of pessimists. "If we're going down, might as well make sure we take him with us, right?" Outside the viewport, Earth loomed like a silent judge, the verdant greens and blues contrasting sharply against the chaotic interior of the station. The space elevator was barely holding on. A few more minutes and it might decide it had had enough of their shenanigans and collapse completely. "Let's just hope the alien AI doesn't have a sense of humor," Vex muttered. "Or we might end up as cosmic punchlines." As if on cue, the AI voice chirped in with its usual misguided cheerfulness. "Warning, catastrophic failure imminent. Please remain calm while total annihilation takes place." "Thanks for the pep talk," Vex said, rolling her eyes. "I feel much better now." With the console humming under her touch, Vex initiated the paradox sequence. Lights flashed and screens blipped in protest as if the very fabric of the station's reality was warping under the strain of their audacity. "Here goes nothing," Nova sighed, an edge of thrill in her voice despite the impending doom. Jax crossed his arms, watching the unfolding chaos with the air of someone watching a bar fight from a safe distance. "Anyone else feel like we're the blind leading the blind here?" "Shut it," Vex shot back, though she couldn't help but smirk. "We're more like the reckless leading the desperate." The paradox was now set in motion, a cacophony of conundrums that would make any logical entity's head spin. The alien AI seemed to hiccup, its calculated precision faltering as if someone had thrown a wrench into its works, an apt description given the motley crew manning the station. "They're trying to counter," Nova reported, eyes glued to the data stream. "But it's like they're chasing their own tails." "Good," Vex said, the word carrying a weight of its own. "Let's keep it that way." As they worked, the station shuddered violently, a reminder of how close they danced to the edge of oblivion. The space elevator, their tenuous lifeline to Earth, groaned ominously. It was a race against time, and they were running with broken legs and a blindfold. "Think we'll get a medal for this?" Jax asked, his tone somewhere between jest and genuine curiosity. In this line of work, Vex replied dryly, we'd be lucky to get a half-decent funeral. Sounds like a party, Nova said with a sardonic smile. I'll bring the drinks. The alien forces, realizing their predictive capabilities were as effective as a chocolate fire guard, shifted tactics. They moved from precision strikes to brute force, hammering at the station with a relentless fury that spoke volumes of their displeasure. Guess they don't like being outsmarted, Jax observed, watching as sparks flew from an overworked console. Or they're terrible losers, Vex quipped. Either way, sucks to be them. The station groaned again, a long, agonizing sound that spoke of metal fatigue and failing systems. Vex felt a pang of sympathy, not for the aliens but for the station itself. It was a piece of junk, sure, but it was their piece of junk, and they were determined to keep it in one piece. Thank you very much. Okay, team, Vex said, a note of finality in her voice. Let's show these bastards what happens when you push humans to the brink. With renewed vigor, they worked the controls, fingers flying over keys with reckless abandon. It was a dance of chaos, risky and unpredictable, but for once, unpredictability was their greatest weapon. You know, Jax said, his voice carrying a grin. If we survive this, drinks are on me. Nova snorted, a sound that somehow conveyed both amusement and disbelief. If we survive this, I'm retiring to a nice, quiet planet where the most exciting thing is watching the grass grow. Retirement's for quitters, Vex retorted, though there was a flicker of warmth in her words. And we're not done yet. The chaos continued to unfold, each of them playing their part in the grand, insane scheme they'd concocted. The paradox was doing its job, sowing confusion where there should have been calculated strategy. It was messy, unrefined, and thoroughly human. The elevator creaked ominously, a sound that sent a shiver down Vex's spine. It was a countdown to catastrophe, each tick a reminder of how thin the line between survival and oblivion truly was. Any last words? Jax asked, his voice carrying a lightness that belied the gravity of their situation. Vex considered for a moment before replying. Yeah, screw destiny. With a final, decisive clatter of keys, they unleashed the last salvo of their paradox assault. It was a data storm that defied comprehension, an onslaught of contradictions that no algorithm could hope to unravel. The alien AI, caught in the maelstrom, struggled and failed to regain its footing. Its efforts became increasingly frantic, each move less coherent than the last, until it was little more than a flailing beast caught in a trap of its own making. They're faltering, Nova announced, her voice a mixture of disbelief and triumph. It's working, Vex breathed, the words feeling like a revelation. We might actually pull this off. Outside, Earth loomed ever larger, a reminder of both the stakes and the goal. It was a monstrous, beautiful sight, a testament to everything they fought for and against. It was the promise of survival and the threat of annihilation rolled into one. Well, Jax said, breaking the silence with a grin. That's one for the history books. Vex nodded, her eyes never leaving the console. Yeah, let's just hope we live long enough to read it. The gauntlet ascend shuddered beneath them, a final testament to their defiance. They'd pushed the limit, danced on the razor's edge, and against all odds they'd held their own. But it wasn't over, not yet. The alien forces, though battered, were not beaten, and the space elevator, that tenuous thread between them and Earth, was still precariously close to snapping. Keep it together, Vex said, more to herself than anyone else. We're not done fighting. With determination etched into every line of her face, she turned her attention back to the console. They'd come this far, and by all that was chaotic and unpredictable in the universe, they weren't going to stop now, because this was humanity at its finest, irreverent, defiant, and just crazy enough to think they could win. Jax chuckled, a sound full of bravado and madness. Here's to never giving up. Nova grinned, a spark of fire in her eyes. And to making sure they never forget us. And with that, they threw themselves back into the fray, ready to face whatever came next. The universe might be vast and uncaring, but they were here. and they weren't going anywhere without leaving a mark. Because that's what it meant to be human, to fight, to defy, and to never, ever back down. And if the aliens didn't like it, well, they'd just have to deal with it. Vex Rigel stood at the console, her foot tapping like a death row inmate counting down the seconds to their last meal. She glanced over at Jax, who was leaning against the bulkhead, with that infuriating grin plastered across his face, as if the world wasn't about to go up in flames around them. "How's it looking, Vex?" Jax drawled, his tone as casual as if he were asking about the weather rather than the impending destruction of their orbital hub. "Like a Picasso painting," Vex shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Beautifully chaotic and utterly nonsensical." Nova Cade, ever the model of poise and competence, sat perched at her datapad, the light casting an eerie glow across her face. "Don't worry, Vex. I've seen us pull off crazier stunts than this," she said, fingers tapping away with the precision of a surgeon performing a heart transplant mid-earthquake. "Yeah, like the time we accidentally blew up half a moon," Jax quipped, unfazed. "Good times." Vex rolled her eyes, though a smirk tugged at her lips. "Let's just hope this paradox doesn't turn us into space dust." The plan was as harebrained as they came. Inject a paradox into the alien AI core systems, effectively turning its processing power against itself. It was a gamble, the kind that could either save them or end with a spectacular, fiery demise. No middle ground here, just the way Vex liked it, when she wasn't busy regretting her life choices. "Launching the paradox in 3, 2, 1, Vex announced, each number punctuated by the pounding of her heart. Outside, Earth loomed like the world's most disappointed parent, a reminder that they had everything to lose. The space elevator, their literal link to salvation, groaned ominously, its cables straining under the pressure of the chaos unfolding around them. "Buckle up," Nova said, a hint of adrenaline-fueled excitement lacing her voice. "This is gonna be a bumpy ride." As the paradox took root, the alien AI convulsed, its once seamless operations reduced to a chaotic mess of contradictory data streams. It was like watching an opera singer hit every wrong note simultaneously, a beautiful disaster in the making. "Guess they weren't ready for a dose of human illogic," Jax remarked, watching the AI frantic attempts to right itself with the satisfaction of someone who'd just watched a rival slip on a banana peel. Vex offered a wry grin. Nothing like good old-fashioned nonsense to throw a wrench in their plans. The station shuddered again, a not-so-gentle reminder that victory wasn't assured just yet. The alien AI, though temporarily disoriented, would find its footing soon enough unless they kept the pressure on. "Nova, keep feeding it contradictions," Vex ordered, her fingers flying over the console. "We need to keep it off balance until we can stabilize the station." "Consider it done," Nova replied, her voice as steady as ever. "I've got a whole library's worth of paradoxes ready to go." With each paradox unleashed, the alien AI floundered, its predictive algorithms as useful as a paper umbrella in a thunderstorm. It was a delicious chaos, one that left Vex feeling both exhilarated and slightly guilty, like she was cheating on a test and getting away with it. "Hey, Vex," Jax called out, a teasing lilt to his voice. "If this all goes south, think we'll end up in the history books. In this line of work," Vex replied dryly, never missing a beat. "We're more likely to end up as a cautionary tale." The space elevator creaked again, a sound that sent a shiver down Vex's spine. It was a reminder that time was not on their side. Every second counted, and yet every second felt like an eternity. "Just hold on a little longer," she muttered to herself, though whether she was talking to the elevator or herself was anyone's guess. Outside, the alien forces regrouped, their tactics shifting from precision to brute force. It was a crude, desperate attempt to overwhelm the station, but effective all the same. Sparks flew from an overworked console, the sharp scent of burnt circuitry filling the air like the world's least appetizing perfume. "Looks like they're finally taking us seriously," Nova observed, her tone wry. "About damn time," Jax replied with a snort. We've only been trying to get under their skin all day." Vex couldn't help but chuckle, her laughter tinged with the madness of the situation. "Let's just hope they don't figure out how to return the favor." Their fingers danced over keys, the rhythmic clatter a symphony of defiance. The paradox continued to unravel the alien AI composure, its systems so tangled up they couldn't tell left from right or up from down. It was a disaster, and it was glorious. "Okay, team," Vex said, her voice carrying the weight of a commander with nothing left to lose. "Let's finish this." With renewed vigor, they launched the final salvo of paradoxes, each one a calculated jab at the AI core. It was a battle of attrition, a test of endurance, and against all odds they were winning. "Anyone else feel like we're in a bad sci-fi movie?" Jax asked, a cheeky grin plastered on his face. Nova smirked, her fingers never pausing in their dance. "As long as we get a happy ending, I'm not complaining." The alien AI, caught in the maelstrom of contradictions, faltered, its system spiraling out of control in a final, desperate attempt to save itself. It was like watching a juggernaut brought low by its own hubris, a tragic comedy that was both satisfying and terrifying. "We did it," Nova announced, disbelief mingling with triumph in her voice. "We actually did it." Vex let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Let's not celebrate just yet. We still have to deal with the aftermath." The gauntlet ascend shuddered beneath them, a reminder that their victory, though sweet, was not without consequence. The space elevator, their lifeline to Earth, teetered on the edge of collapse, its cables straining under the weight of their defiance. "Think we'll make it?" Jax asked, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability beneath the bravado. Vex considered for a moment before replying, her eyes never leaving the console. "We've come this far. Can't quit now." With a final, decisive push, they stabilized the station, the lights flickering back to life in a triumphant blaze of artificial daylight. The space elevator held, its structure groaning but intact, a testament to human ingenuity and stubbornness. "We did it," Nova repeated, her voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." Vex allowed herself a small smile, the weight of their accomplishment settling on her shoulders. "Yeah, we did." Outside, Earth loomed larger than before, a promise of both survival and the monumental task that lay ahead. But for now they had won, and that was enough. "Well," Jax said, breaking the silence with that irrepressible grin of his, "I don't know about you guys, but I could really go for a drink." Nova laughed, a sound that was more relief than amusement. "I'll bring the good stuff." Vex nodded, her gaze fixed on the console. They had a long road ahead, but they'd face it together. Because that's what it meant to be human, to fight, to defy, and to never back down. And if the universe didn't like it, well, tough luck. They were here to stay. The gauntlet ascend had stopped its groaning, which was a relief. The AI, having been served a dish best described as paradox a la confusion, was now a mess of useless circuits. Vex Rigel stood with a smirk that could sigh or milk, her eyes sweeping the control room. Jax, as expected, was already leaning back against the bulkhead, looking for all the world as if they'd just completed a particularly invigorating round of holo chess. "Well, that's a wrap," Jax said, shaking imaginary dust from his hands. "How'd you like your apocalypse, Vex?" "Well done or medium rare." Vex rolled her eyes, turning back to the console. "Could have used more seasoning, but hey, beggars can't be choosers." Nova Cade's fingers danced over her datapad like she was composing an angry email to an ex. "I've locked the AI out of the main systems. It won't be bothering us again. Unless it learns necromancy," Jax quipped, grinning like a cat with a canary. Vex shook her head. "Yeah, because that's what we need, a zombie AI. Next thing you know, it'll be demanding brains for input." The room filled with a collective exhale, the kind that comes after a near-death experience, like waking up from a nightmare about missing final exams only to remember you graduated years ago. The space elevator, their precarious umbilical cord to Earth, still dangled like the universe's most dangerous string toy, but it seemed to be holding together. "Well, at least we're not space debris," Nova said, her voice laced with dry humor. "Yet," Jax added. Always gotta consider that encore performance. Outside the viewport, Earth sat like a silent judge, waiting to see if they'd learned their lesson. Knowing humanity, it was a safe bet they hadn't. But for now, the monstrous blue orb seemed to reserve judgment. "Think we're getting medals for this?" Jax asked, his tone all mock innocence. Vex snorted. "Yeah, medals made out of tin foil and a handshake from a low-level bureaucrat. Our legacy's secure." Nova leaned back, her datapad finally at rest. "Maybe they'll name the next model of space elevator after us. The Flying Junkyard," Jax suggested, his grin never faltering. "Catchy," Vex replied. "It'll be a hit in the scrapyard circuit." As the adrenaline seeped out of their bones, the room cooled, settling into something almost like peace. Well, as peaceful as things could get, with alarm klaxons still wailing in the distance and the occasional spark from an overworked circuit. "So, what now?" Nova asked, as if they hadn't just averted a cosmic disaster with the power of human logic. "Damage control," Vex said, rubbing her temples. "We're still on the brink of falling apart. The Gauntlet Ascend may have survived, but it's held together with tape and good intentions." Jax looked around. Good intentions. Must have missed that shipment. A holographic projection of the alien AI systems flickered on a nearby screen, still thrashing in the paradoxical web they'd woven. It was like watching a cat try to escape a particularly pesky piece of tape stuck to its paw. Vex's gaze softened just a fraction. The kind of look that said, "Hey, we're alive, aren't we? That's got to count for something." But she'd never say it out loud, too sentimental. "All right," Vex said, clapping her hands. "Let's get moving. Anyone who's not up for some good old-fashioned manual labor can take a nap. The rest of you, time to fix this tin can." Jax stretched, letting out a theatrical groan. "Been ages since I did anything manual. Guess it's good to flex the muscles." "Thought you flexed enough just by leaning against things," Nova retorted, her smile almost as mocking as Jax's usual expression. They moved through the corridors of the Gauntlet Ascend, fixing what they could and ignoring what they couldn't. The ship was a patchwork quilt of technology and desperation, and as much as Vex hated to admit it, she loved every scrap of it. While patching a particularly rebellious section of wiring, Jax looked up. "Think the aliens will send us a thank you note for not blowing up their AI completely, right after they send us an apology for trying to wipe us out?" Nova said, her voice dry as a desert. They worked in companionable silence, broken only by the occasional sarcastic comment or groan of frustration. It was the kind of silence earned through trust and shared near-death experiences. You know, the usual bonding activities. Vex found herself in the engine room, staring at an array of blinking lights that resembled Christmas on steroids. It was one of the last places she needed to check, but something about the hum of the engines was comforting. A reminder that, despite everything, the Gauntlet Ascend was still kicking. Nova joined her, leaning against the doorway. "How's it looking?" "Like a Picasso," Vex replied with a tired grin. "But at least it's not trying to kill us anymore. Always a plus." Nova hesitated, her usual composure slipping just a bit. "You think we did the right thing?" Vex met her gaze, honesty in her eyes. "You mean by not going out in a blaze of glory?" Nova chuckled. "Yeah, something like that. We did what humans do best," Vex said with a shrug. "We survived, and we did it our way." Nova nodded, the weight of their shared experience settling comfortably between them. "Guess you're right." "Of course I'm right," Vex said, her grin widening. "Now let's get this junk heap running before Jax decides to redecorate." Their work was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Vex felt a flicker of hope. Not the naive kind that suggested everything would be okay, but the kind that acknowledged the chaos and still found a reason to laugh. As they stepped back into the main corridor, Jax was waiting with that infuriatingly charming grin. "So did we save the day?" Vex rolled her eyes. "As much as we could, considering. And here I thought you'd gone soft," Jax teased. "Keep dreaming," Vex shot back, her smile belying her words. Together they made their way to the observation deck, where Earth loomed larger than life. It was a view that never got old, even when it threatened to crush them with the weight of its expectations. Nova joined them, her presence a grounding force. "Think they'll throw us a parade?" Jack snorted. "Parade? More like a strongly worded memo about protocol violations." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Vex said, arms crossed as she looked out at the planet below. As they stood there, the remnants of the space elevator, now just a collection of twisted metal and frayed cables, served as a monument to their audacity and survival. It wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. And sometimes, that was all that mattered. The gauntlet ascend might have been a disaster waiting to happen, but it was their disaster. And they'd proven that, come hell or high space, humans were as unpredictable and resilient as ever. "To the gauntlet ascend," Vex said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to us," Nova added. Jax raised his hands in mock toast. "May we always defy the odds and annoy our enemies." They clinked their non-existent glasses, laughter bubbling up to fill the room. It wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was a damn good start. Because that's what it meant to be human, to fight, to defy, and to never, ever back down. Even when the universe was stacked against them, they found a way to win. And if the aliens or anyone else didn't like it, well, they'd just have to deal with it. For now, they had each other, a rickety space station, and a newfound respect for their own brand of insanity. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. Vex took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling around her like a comfortable old coat. The universe was a vast and uncaring place, but together, they'd carved out their own little corner of chaos. And with any luck, they'd be able to keep it. "Well," Jack said, his voice carrying a hint of mischief. "Who's up for another round of saving the universe tomorrow?" Vex laughed, the sound echoing through the room. "You know what? I just might take you up on that. Because that's what it meant to be human, to fight, to defy, and to never, ever back down. And in the end, that was enough."